G'day YouTubers. In this episode I want to try and talk a little bit about boating safety and types of boats. I'll just say at the start that it's taken me a couple of months to put this video together, so if some of the commentary seems a little bit disjointed, I'm sorry for that. It did become a little bit random at times, and that was just a function of the amount of time that it took to work on it. Recently I've been asked by several people what sort of boat they should buy if they want to go and fish Point X, or if they've got this particular sort of boat, what sort of weather would be safe for them to go out and fish Point X. The other questions I get asked a bit is this boat any good, or is this motor big enough for the boat? I really stress out when I'm asked questions like that because I'm giving an opinion on something I don't know enough about. I have no idea what anyone's skill level is in a boat. Even if they're complete novice, they may have the sort of personality that makes them safe. I see people on the internet asking, is it going to be safe to take my boat over to Moreton on the weather tomorrow? And really, if you've got to ask the question, the answer should be no. But I see a lot of guys just say, yeah, it's going to be great, send it. Yeah, look, you could be sending that guy to his death. You don't know what his experience level is, and you don't know that the weather's not going to change before he comes back. Just to go back to what I find stressful about the original question though, the boat the guy is looking at or the motor the guy is looking at might be the best he can afford, and it might be perfectly adequate for what he wants to do with it, given his skill level and personality, which I don't know. But if I say, no, you need something bigger, then he goes without a boat, and I don't want to do that to him. I don't want to say it's good enough too if he's going to go out there and sink. And for that reason I do find that question really stressful. But later on, I'm going to give you some clues on how you can make up your mind for yourself. I realised immediately that this wasn't going to be an easy video to make, so I've given it a fair bit of thought before I put the video together. The answer I've come up with is not black and white. I'm afraid there's just no one-size-fits-all answer to this question. There are so many factors to consider that only the person that's preparing to part with their money to buy the boat can actually make that decision. And only the person that's preparing to go out and fish can actually make the decision whether it's safe to do so. I know this isn't going to answer the question that most people ask on the boating forums, and that is, there's a forecast wind of X knots and I've got my U-Butte Ocean Master boat, is it safe for me to go to Moreton? Well, only the skipper can answer that. And there's a good reason why no one but the skipper can answer that question. It's all a matter of experience. One skipper might be able to make the trip in perfect safety, while another might need a good helping of luck to get them through it alive, and both in the same type of boat. The other thing to keep in mind is that the weather in Moreton Bay can change with alarming rapidity, and I have seen the weather forecasters miss the actual wind speed by as much as 20 knots, so conditions on the return trip could be vastly different from those going out. You need to take that into consideration as well. I'm sure everyone can understand that a boat that's perfectly suited for fishing on the inland lakes and rivers may not be suited for conditions on the bay, and would almost certainly not be suited for conditions in the open ocean. I'm fairly conservative when it comes to picking a seaworthy boat. In particular, I like a lot of freeboard in any boat. I have owned some boats in the past that were somewhat lacking in that respect, and they do require careful handling in rough water. That leads me to the main point in selecting a boat for a particular purpose and deciding whether the weather is right for fishing today. The number one factor in these decisions is the experience level of the captain and, to some extent, the crew. The number two factor, in my opinion, is how uncomfortable the captain and crew are willing to be to get to where they're going. When I was younger, I was prepared to put up with an incredible amount of discomfort to get to that fishing spot. These days, I prefer to be a little bit more comfortable, and if my wife's with me, she's happiest when the water is glassed out. And all those guys that are married will understand just how important it is to have a happy wife. Now, first of all, what makes a seaworthy boat? Unfortunately, there is no one definition of seaworthiness. Unlike men, all boats are not created equal. A houseboat might be perfectly seaworthy on a lake or in a river, but I would never dream of taking one out in the central or northern bay, let alone taking it across a bar to the open ocean. Beyond picking a type of boat that is capable of doing what you require of it, there is also the matter of the captain's experience. Let's be realistic here. The Titanic was a big boat and it had an experienced captain, but it still sank. So having the best boat and the most experienced captain is no guarantee of safety. The best you can hope for is to stack the odds in your favour. In an emergency situation, every decision that you make will have an impact on every subsequent decision you will have to make. In other words, one bad decision often leads to more bad decisions. This is a well-recognised phenomenon in air crash investigations. I'll try and talk about it a little bit later and give some detail and some examples and make some suggestions of what can be done to avoid the trap. Let's talk about a very hypothetical example. Suppose Billy Joe Jim Bob has owned a tinny which he's been using on the local lakes and dams quite safely for many years. He decides he'd like to fish one of these reefs that he's heard about on YouTube. So he hitches up the boat and drives on down to Brisbane. Heads out from one of the ramps to the South Passage bar. It's his lucky day, the bay's like glass, and even the bar doesn't have a lot of swell on it. It's a nice high tide, so with no local knowledge at all, he gets out over it and away he goes. Once he gets a few kilometres out offshore and into the ocean swell, things are not looking quite as good as they were. Having fished the lakes and dams for years where weather wasn't really a problem, he hasn't done his homework on the weather conditions for the day either. He gets quite a surprise when the wind picks up to 20 odd knots and it gets decidedly rough. Heading back in, it's that rough that he can't get the boat up on the plane, so he's wallowing around. The boat's getting tossed here, there and everywhere. He's getting stirred, the petrol in the petrol tank's getting stirred, but eventually he makes it to the bar and he starts to get across this rough bar. And just then, all the debris and water and rubbish that's been sitting in the bottom of that petrol tank for many years, and is quite happy to sit there while he's on the lakes, finally gets up through the fuel lines and reaches the engine. His engine stops in the middle of the bar and it becomes another statistic. That was a very contrived story, but if you think about it, there's several lessons that can be drawn from it which will make you a better skipper. Now, first of all, let me say that a really good skipper can get away with a less than optimum boat for the conditions that he's travelling in sometimes. I've done it in the past, but I now recognise that the Titanic captain's luck eventually ran out, so these days I put my faith in experience and seaworthiness rather than experience and luck. In other words, buy the most seaworthy boat you can afford, regardless of your experience level. I heard a saying once that bears repeating: you start your life with a full bag of luck and an empty bag of experience. The goal of the game is to fill the bag of experience before the bag of luck runs out, and if you think about it, that is so true. Now, was my contrived story believable? Well, it should be. The number of boats that have gone down on the bars around the country should be enough to convince anyone that it can happen to any boat, any skipper, any time. Never mind the bars, there's been a lot of lives lost just in Moreton Bay over the years. When I was flying, the club that I was with had a picture up on the wall. It was a biplane that had crashed into the only tree on an otherwise featureless plain. And the caption on it said, "Aviation in itself is not inherently dangerous, but to an even greater degree than the sea, it is terribly unforgiving of any carelessness, incapacity or neglect." Now, I disagree with that on one level, and that is that the sea is very unforgiving. I think it is just as unforgiving as the air. You have to cover all your bases. You wouldn't cross the road without looking both ways. Don't go out on the water without doing all your homework as well. So how do you gain enough experience to keep yourself safe, comfortable and most importantly alive? Well, if you start young, the usual method is to trust to your bag of luck and a good helping of willful ignorance to get you through a dangerous situation until you gain enough experience to know better. It's a little wasteful of lives, but on average most people manage to get through that phase. It's not the one that I'd recommend. Is there a better way? Hell yes. Well, certainly a safer way at least. Start off by learning all you can from videos and books, and then get some experience on the water by going out only on the very best days. What makes a very best day? Well, difficult to say in some situations in the Central Bay, but start off with the wind well under 10 knots, as far under 10 knots as you can get. Sometimes a year you won't get that much, so just be patient. I'd be looking for a maximum of 7 knots for the first couple of trips out in a smaller boat. Make sure the forecast is the same all day, and we'll talk about tides and winds a little bit later. As you gain more experience and confidence, you'll be prepared to go out when the wind's a little bit stronger. Just a couple of knots at a time. If you did fine at 7 knots, go out at 10 knots and see how those conditions suit you and the boat. Probably sooner rather than later, you're going to decide that X knots of wind is all that you really want to go out in, because that's what's comfortable. After a few more months, when you've gained some more experience on the bay, you'll decide that X knots of wind isn't all that bad after all, and you'll add a couple more knots to it. You will eventually reach the point where you just don't want to go out in a particular wind. I used to go out in some really fierce winds. These days 15 knots is about all I want to go out in. It's just not comfortable in the Central Bay with anything above that. As your experience level goes up, so will your confidence. Just remember that the idea here is to take baby steps, so don't get overconfident, because that's the surest way I know to tempt fate. There's another saying back from my aviation days that is very applicable, and that is that there are old airmen and there are bold airmen, but there are no old, bold airmen. The same can be said about seamen. But skippers do get lucky all the time. Truth be told, I probably had my fair share of luck back when I was younger. These days I prefer good risk management and planning over luck. So, what's involved in that? Service your boat regularly. The most obvious thing here is to get your motor serviced according to the manufacturer's recommendations. For me, that's getting it serviced every 100 hours. This costs me between $1,200 and $1,800 a year, but I think it's worth every cent for the peace of mind that my engine is going to start when I'm miles offshore and want to go home. It's also going to keep running all the way home. If you can't afford to get someone to do this for you, then get some books, watch some videos and do it yourself. If you can't do either of these things, then in all honesty, sell your boat to someone who can. Maintenance isn't just limited to the engine. Go over your boat and inspect everything and fix anything that isn't perfect. There's all sorts of things on the boat. There's the anchor, the winch, the rope, chains. You might have a Minn Kota that needs servicing. Downriggers need servicing. I'll do a video on it all later and give you an idea of what I look for, but just be aware everything on the boat needs to be looked at regularly. And the rest of the boat isn't the job of your engine mechanic. He's there to service your engine. He won't be inspecting anything else on the boat for you. He might if you ask him, but that'll cost you extra. And while we're on the subject of maintenance and inspection, while it won't affect the seaworthiness of your boat, don't forget your trailer. That needs to be inspected and maintained regularly as well. It's getting dipped in salt water all the time, and salt water causes corrosion. Corrosion is an enemy of trailers. Check the weather when you plan a trip. Check it again the night before you go. Check it again in the morning before you leave for the house. Check it again when you get to the ramp, and ensure that the reality of the weather matches the forecast, or that the actual wind is below the forecast. If the actual wind is above the forecast, then consider plan B or go home. I know it's frustrating to turn around and go home once you're down at the ramp. I've done it several times myself, but it's the only safe thing to do if the weather's not looking good. What's the most dangerous situation that you can get into at sea on a boat? If you ask 4 different people, you'll probably get 4 different answers, but my answer is fire. A petrol tank and a fiberglass boat is a very dangerous combination in the case of a fire at sea. Most fires on a boat start from petrol or LPG vapours that are ignited by a spark. For that reason, I pay particular attention to my wiring during boat inspections. I have a fire blanket and a fire extinguisher on board, and they're readily accessible, and they are the #1 line of defence against the fire at sea. Unfortunately, the #2 line of defence against the fire at sea is to jump overboard. Most people can see the value of having a bilge pump on their boat, and it does come in handy for pumping out water that you've thrown around to clean up the boat a bit. What most people don't realise is that most bilge pumps that are fitted to boats won't pump out enough water to keep your boat afloat if the hull is compromised. Don't believe me? Here's an experiment. Leave your bungs out, back your trailer into the water and see if your bilge pump can keep up with the inrush of water through the bung holes. If it can't, then it isn't big enough. And just on the off chance that someone is actually going to try this, make sure your boat stays on the trailer, leave your safety straps on, and pull it out before it gets so heavy that your car can't pull it back up the ramp. I don't think anyone will actually have to try it to understand the concept that I'm trying to get across here. The danger that most skippers are likely to face at some point in their life if they spend enough time on the water is sickness and injury. Seasickness can be addressed easily with appropriate medication before you leave. But if someone has a serious medical incident on board, what are you going to do? How quickly can you get them back to shore? How quickly can you get help for them? What about if they just get a really serious cut? Can you do something about that? Even a hook through the foot or hand? Depending on where you are, the answer may be it will take too long to get back. It will certainly take too long to get back if you ask the opinion of the injured party. What you can do is have a first aid kit on board, make sure it's a good one with plenty of content, and make sure you know how to use it. Check the contents as part of your boat inspection. Also, make sure your radio's working, so if there is a serious medical incident, you can contact shore and arrange for an ambulance to meet you if necessary, or arrange for a faster boat to come out and pick up the patient. Well, I've done it again. I've managed to create a multi-part series out of something I thought was going to be fairly short. When I was asked to do some videos on boating safety or picking a boat or other related subjects, I sat down and recorded all the audio that I thought would be useful, but when I went to edit it and strung the audio together, it went for a lot longer than I planned. So I've cut this video off at 15 minutes. I got no idea how much more there is, but I would guess 3 or 4 more episodes. I'll put them out sporadically because there's a lot of editing goes into these videos. They're difficult videos to do, not as easy as taking a camera out on a boat and recording it out there. I spent a fair bit of this video just reiterating that there's only one guy that can make safety decisions in relation to their boat. In subsequent videos I hope to pass on some information that will help you to make those decisions, some of my personal experiences on the bay, and just some general safety tips. When it comes to buying a boat, I can't tell you what to buy, but I can give you a few hints on working out what not to buy, so I'll do that later on in the videos. All of this is just my opinion that I've arrived at through my own experiences. Others may disagree or have different opinions. That's fine, have a listen to what everyone's got to say and make up your own mind. While this video is mainly intended for people that are new to boating, there may be something amongst my random thoughts that will help someone who's more experienced. I do hope everyone gets something out of it. As always, there's more videos on my YouTube channel, so please go there and have a look at them. Don't forget to click the like button, comment and subscribe. Until next time, good fishing.